Hi, my name is Dan Pelleg, and I'm the Chief AI Officer at EV Power. I'm going to talk about theory versus practice in the EV charging world. At EV Power, we are a startup that is focused on powering the operations of charge point operators using AI. We have an AI platform to optimize the operation of the stations. It maximizes their value, it improves reliability, it accelerates the charging, and it runs with any backend software that you currently have. It does not require any new hardware. Installation is in 60 seconds, complete integration with whatever you have right now, and it manages any kind of charging equipment. The algorithms we have are best in class, and the performance we measured in actual deployments is through the roof. Beyond operating the charging stations right now, our vision is to turn them into tradable energy assets, put them on the energy market, and with that, help stabilize the grid. Back to the basics of EV charging. And the very basic element that you have is the charge curve. The charge curve, as plotted here, changes from vehicle to vehicle, and each model is different. On the x-axis, you have the battery's state of charge from 0 to 100%, and the y-axis is the amount of power, the maximum amount of power the battery can take. You can try to push more, but it will not use it. When I say battery, I actually mean the controller, the BMS, which is a computer that sits inside your vehicle and controls all of the electronics and power that goes into the battery. Some vehicles, as shown in the blue curve, can go up to very high values of power. In this example, up to 250 kilowatts, and that's a lot. It's hard to find a charger that will give you that much power. And other vehicles, like the green one, are taking no more than 80 kilowatts at any given time. Now, regardless of how much they take in the peak, you can see that all of these models, and pretty much any model on the market, will take very little power when it reaches 100%. This actually has to do with the chemistry and is something that current technology does not know how to solve. So when you get to full, the power drops, and that is regardless how much you were able to take at the peak. Let's remember that, because this is something that we're going to see more of in the remainder of the talk. Now, this is theoretical. This is in the lab. This is as the vehicle was manufactured, but what happens on the ground with all of the factors that go in when you meet the constraints in practice. An actual charge curve that we observed on one of our stations is shown in this chart here below. It is going from high to low as we observed, but it's very noisy. The lines are not straight and there's a lot of fluctuation. And the factors that can cause that range from things that happen inside of the vehicle. Maybe it's related to the temperature. If it's too hot, then that's not good. If it's too cold, then that's extremely bad. And the BMS would respond. And actually, it would try to heat the battery if it's too cold, but that also takes time and energy. Maybe the battery is deteriorated because of its age. Maybe the BMS knows about that and throttles the power. Maybe it doesn't, and you have power losses. Maybe the driver is in the vehicle making a phone call and the AC is turned on and using power. When you go outside of the vehicle, you have constraints from the station. Maybe you are using a dual nozzle charger and your neighbor is using some of the functional units inside of the charger, so you cannot utilize them. And maybe it's just hard to switch and relay so much power. These are big systems. 100 kilowatt is a lot of power, and it doesn't just turn on and off like that with no noises and other factors. And then when you step back more, there is the composition of all of the vehicles, all of the models on the market that the charge point operator sees. Maybe models that are sold today are bigger or faster or slower than last year. And maybe the driver preferences have changed, and maybe they are changing based on where the station is located, and that would affect how much power they want to take. So how does that all combine when you look at large scale charging operations from the perspective of a station? And we are able to observe many charging sessions and put them all in one big chart. And this is basically what we have done here. This is the aggregated charge curve. For every session, we measure multiple times within the session what happens. And in particular, we measure and record the state of charge from 0 to 100 and the power level from 0 to 500 kilowatts. And the median, the average, if you will, the median line is actually the blue line in the middle, and it goes down as we spoke. It is fairly low at 80%. It starts going down at 60, but 80 is getting really low. And there's a rule of thumb thing saying do not charge above 80% because it'll be slow. Then yes, that is confirmed by data. It's definitely something you should know about. But I want you to look at the range, all of that shaded area, which is from the 25th to the 75th percentile of observed power values. And at the beginning, it's very high. There's a 70 kilowatt range from low to high, meaning that it really depends what kind of vehicle you came in with and how much constraints there are around you. But if you follow the line further to the right, then it gets really narrow near the end. So confirmation that big and small vehicles are all in the same bucket. Even from the station's perspective, it's important to look at these things in the aggregate. And here it is fairly well confirmed that this is happening. Now, I want to argue that drivers don't care, right? Drivers don't care about kilowatts. Some of them don't even know what that is. They care about time. And we need to translate this to drivers in terms of time. So we have done that. We are looking at the same data now, and we're basically measuring the time it takes to add 20% to your battery, right? And 20% is something we've seen that is preferred by drivers in highway stations. They want to add a little bit range so they can get home, but not too much. They're still doing their stuff, working, and they need to be able to get back home and charge overnight with a usually cheaper rate than what they have on the road. So they're thinking about how do I add 20% to my range? And this is the empirical chart of how much would it take to add 20% if you've gone in at 30, if you've gone in at 50, and it can take 10 minutes. If you're doing it at a good time, it can take double that if you're doing it at a bad time. So that's the practical translation of what we have seen in the power and kilowatt world. And we do actually want to take this one step further and play with the parameters. Now, you want to play with that and see what happens when parameters change. And for that, we have developed a tool at EV Power, and this is a digital twin for an EV charging station. It monitors and models every joule of energy going in from the input source all the way to the batteries. And along the way, it models the chargers, the charge curves, the different models that you have, how much time the driver wants to charge, what kind of arrival times do you have, how many cars do you have on the road, and so on and so forth. We use it extensively for planning purposes and for what-if scenarios. We can look at a station and say, what would happen if I added a dual nozzle 180 kilowatt charger to it? Would that be economical for me? And it's a great tool for simulation because you can feed in different conditions and measure the outcomes. And this is exactly what we have done in the context of the charging curves. We modeled station with two different scenarios. It's the same setup and number of chargers in both scenarios, but one of them is the highway scenario, where a typical session is add 20%. The number 20 is not exact, this is all stochastic, and there's random numbers everywhere, but on average, you add 20%. The second scenario is a shopping mall where you have 20% additions, but also drivers who have something else to do in the same place. So they would leave their vehicles for longer periods. And obviously, as they say longer, the charge curve diminishes. We have done thousands of simulations in most cases, and we played with the load. The load is basically how many EVs do you have on the road? What is the customer demand? And we measured two things. The first thing is utilization, time utilization of the nozzle, meaning that out of every given minute, what's the probability that it will be occupied, it will be connected to a paying customer? Between 0 and 100%, that's a fairly widely used number when planning a station. If the utilization is low, I won't be making any money, so I shouldn't build it. Utilization-wise, the shopping mall wins. There's more time when there is a paying customer at the pump. And this is on the left chart. The blue line is for the shopping mall, the orange line is for the highway setting. But if you look at the amount of energy sold on the right, there's a reversal. Highway wins, right? When customer load is high, there's more energy sold even though utilization is lower. And this is because there are fewer drivers at the low end of the charge curve. So you're pushing more power, you're making more money. I'm gonna bake these two charts into one. I'm going to plot every simulation on a chart that has on one axis the utilization value and on the other axis the energy sales. So same data plotted differently. It looks like this. You have again orange for shopping mall, blue for highway, and you can look at the 70% utilization line if you want and see that for a given value of utilization, the highway setting is more profitable. Now, 70% is very busy. It's not commonly seen, but as the market grows, and possibly as the number of chargers you have per driver is reduced, this is what you'll see. This is what you need to take into account. And this is something you can see in our simulations and actually is not intuitive. Currently, the thought is that higher utilization is always better. Now, it's true that low utilization is bad, but when it gets high, then it depends. It really depends what kind of drivers you have and what are their expectations and demands. So that's something that is revealed by simulations as we can run with our digital twin tool. For summary, I'm going to say there are three insights I want you to take from this talk. First, ideal versus realistic. There is published curves and lab measurements, but once you go into the real world, different factors come in and put in variance, and you need to be able to account for that. The second insight is put things in the perspective of the driver. The driver only cares about time and possibly money. In this talk, we talked about time, and this is where you should figure out things for the driver and not from the perspective of the station. Because this is your customer, this is who you need to solve for. And the third insight is that the utilization does not always grow with energy sales. It really depends who are your drivers, what they want to achieve, and how your station is built. So you need to be able to be flexible and be able to plan for different scenarios to maximize your profits. Thank you.